Welcome to this special episode of the Puget Sound Underground podcast. Today, as most of you are aware, the Puget Sound is dealing with an outbreak of the coronavirus. Schools are canceled. Most events are canceled. Airline travel is currently on the chopping block. A lot of people are asking what they can be doing to prepare. Today, our guest is retired U.S. Army Command Sergeant Major and Combat Engineer Jeffrey Slotnick. Now president of Setracon, an enterprise security risk management company, our guest does risk consulting, training, investigations, and hazard vulnerability threat assessments. Our guest has worked with many Fortune 100 companies, utility companies, police departments, and many others. He's a specialist in emergency response planning, threat assessments, and risk management. You may have seen our guest on Fox Q13 News, King 5 News, Cairo News, or Bloomberg News as a security expert. Please welcome to the Puget Sound Underground podcast, Jeffrey Slotnick. Welcome to the Puget Sound Underground podcast. I'm your host, James Marzalek, and today I'm in the studio with Jeffrey Slotnick. Jeffrey, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well, James. How are you today?
I'm really good. This is going to be a really interesting special edition of the Puget Sound Underground podcast. Obviously, I feel like the world is running around with their hair on fire. We've got a lot of craziness going on in our country and in our world right now. Would you tell the people of the Puget Sound Underground who you are, what you do?
Sure. I'm a corporate risk professional. I'm the president of a company called Setracon Incorporated, or we're known as Setracon Enterprise Security Risk Management Services. Now, that's a long phrase to say that what we do is we help companies with identifying risk and then developing the mitigations to make themselves resilient. Because when risk impacts a major company, as we're seeing with coronavirus right now, it has global impact. So when airlines don't fly, when trucks don't run, when supplies can't get to manufacturing plants, when food doesn't get to your shelf, we try to identify those issues ahead of time and help those organizations, including small government, to develop the capacity to be resilient to those events, and through preparedness and training and having a plan in place before the event occurs.
So it seems like we're not very prepared on that on a global level right now. You know, there's a lot of stories about empty shelves and, you know, the schools are shutting down, parents don't know what to do. It seems like even though this isn't the first natural type of this isn't the first time Mother Nature has flexed her muscles, we're still here having these same conversations. So let's talk a little bit about emergency preparedness.
Sure.
And of course, that's on two different scales. That's on an individual basis. How prepared are we as a family or an individual or as a household? And then how are we prepared on the U.S. scale?
Okay.
Why is everybody panicking right now?
Well, you know, fear is an amazing driver, and people fear what they don't know. Whether it's coronavirus or here in the Northwest, a 9.9 magnitude earthquake, or a severe windstorm, or 2 feet of snow, or whatever your disaster du jour is, we need to have a certain level of personal preparedness that allows us to be resilient in the face of these events, to take care of ourselves, to take care of our families, to ensure that we have the things we need in order to survive.
So to those people who are running around with their hair on fire right now, I mean, what would you tell those people? They're obviously not in a position where they're prepared.
Right.
What do those people need to be doing right now? What should they have been thinking about 4 weeks ago?
Well, let's talk about preparedness in the larger sense. You know, there's things that we need to have. You need to have food. You need to have water. You need to have medications. You need to have first aid supplies. And you need to have a little bit of cash. Those are kind of the things that you need to be able to weather out an event. You know, so when you start looking at those things, you know, if you're taking medications, you should have a 30 to 60 day supply of those medications on hand, whatever that medication is. If you in a major event where there's power outages and things like that, ATM machines don't work. So we're very used to walking up to the ATM machine, putting in our card, it puts out cash, and we're happy. Or going to a terminal and swiping a card, and we get what we need. When those terminals aren't working, cash is king. And, I'm not saying that you have to, hoard thousands of dollars, but, having a little bit of cash to cover the necessities in emergency is something that you should have. Let's talk about food. There's many, many different ways to approach food. There's pre-manufactured emergency foods. Those are generally pretty expensive. A good thing to get a hold of, if you can, is the military meals ready to eat, MREs. I mean,
gotta love those.
You bet. I mean, as Crocodile Dundee said, they taste like hell, but you can live off of them. So each one of those is about 2,500 calories. So really, 1 MRE a day is all you need to live well. And they're readily available. There's all kinds of outlets for them. People are selling them all the time on Facebook Marketplace and OfferUp and all these other locations. But if you've got if you want to depend on what comes from the grocery store, you want to look at things that are shelf stable, things that you can keep that will not deteriorate. Or what you do is you use things that you normally use and rotate it through your stock. So I know people laugh at Spam. All right, Spam is a great shelf-stable food. It's actually pretty nutritious. The lower sodium versions are actually not as bad for you as some of the others, but it's a shelf-stable food. But then you look at rice and beans and flour, oil. Those are the things that you need, that you can build meals from those things. Having other canned goods on hand, soups. Soups are great. A soup is a full, complete meal in many cases, canned soup. But, canned vegetables, canned meats, those are all shelf-stable things that you can live off of, and most times they don't even require refrigeration. So, having those things on hand. If you want to get a little bit more advanced, one of the things that I've done for years and that I learned as a young person is canning. So you make that big pot of soup and your family eats it for a day, and then they eat it the second day. And by the third day, nobody wants to look at it, but you still have a half a pot of soup. Instead of throwing it away or putting it, throwing away and disposing of it, take it, put it in good quality mason jars with a lid. You can pressure can by putting in a pressure cooker, or you can hot water bath can. And those things last 6 months to a year, 8 months, 2 years. You should rotate them out periodically and check the seal. But if you do that over time, what you do is you build up this stock of food that you have on hand that in an emergency, or, when you forgot to go to the grocery store, you actually have something to eat. So I'm watching, what's going on at the grocery stores and what's going on at Costco and all these other places. And I'm watching people, and this just amazes me, watching people walking out with cartloads of bottled water. Now, in an earthquake, bottled water might be important, because if it's a significant enough earthquake, then yes, in-ground lines are going to break, water can get tainted, things like that. But what I do is, instead of buying a bunch of bottled water, I keep life straws in all my vehicles. All right, a life straw literally is a purification unit. You can stick it into a pond of water, you can draw through it, and it purifies the water as you drink it. So, and they're not that expensive. I think a life straw is between $20 and $50 on Amazon. But here we are, we're looking at a virus, and people are loading up on bottled water, but yet we live in a first world country where you can literally take water out of any tap, and it's all managed by the US EPA and Department of Health regulations, and it's very healthy to drink the water out of our taps. So, being selective in what you purchase, a lot of people are purchasing disinfectants. Well, the best disinfectant is bleach. All right, you can get chlorine bleach almost anywhere. We use it in our laundry every day. Keep an extra bottle around. A couple of drops of chlorine bleach in water is a great disinfectant for surfaces. It's a great disinfectant for about anything, because nothing lives in chlorine. So, it's just being smart about what you do.
What advice would you give to somebody who's watching this show and says, okay, I obviously have not checked the boxes, I'm not prepared. How does one go about building a roadmap, so to speak, or a plan? Is there a general template that you can use? I mean, is there what's your general best practice for building out the plan for how much cash we're going to have, food, how are we going to deal with water?
Well, you're not going to be able to do it all in one day. So this is a process that takes time. But if I was not at the personal level of preparedness that I was at today, I would be looking to get the essentials that I need every day to survive. And that's what I would be purchasing from the store. Toilet paper is nice and toilet paper works, but you know what? A washcloth, soap, and water works too. And years ago we used to use cloth baby diapers. What do we do with them? You take them, you rinse them out, you put them in the machine, you wash them, or you put them in a bucket with soap and water and you scrub them and then you hang them out to dry. All right, so although toilet paper is nice, there are things to get around if you can't find toilet paper, which I find very doubtful that we're going to have this extended run on toilet paper. But, having the essentials that you need, what do you need? You need food, you need water. Water is taken care of because it's at the tap. Food is something else, and we've talked about that. So you don't have to go out and buy cases of food. I would start off with a 3 to 7 day supply and then realize what you really need to survive. All right. A human being in good health, in good physical fitness, needs 1,800 to 2,200 calories a day to subsist. Okay. That's not, a $6,000 or a 6,000 calorie meal that we need 3 times a day. So, being realistic about expectations for what it takes to survive and having those fundamental items in your home, those are the things that I would look to purchase first.
Okay. Move your mic a little closer, boss.
Yep.
Let's talk about the U.S. because there's a lot of, I don't know if you could call it flack right now, but there's a lot of conversation going around from scientists and medical professionals across the country that are really saying that even though that the warning signs years ago were raised up for the possibility of a virus like this being spread to the U.S., that we are nowhere near prepared on a medical level or a security level. Can you talk a little bit about your opinion on how prepared you think we were for this and what we could be doing from a risk analysis perspective to be doing better?
Well, I think we're very well prepared. I mean, obviously, look, we've been talking about pandemic flu since the mid-2000s. It's actually been exercised here on a state level in Washington State several times in 2009 and 2012 and others, because pandemic flu is just another pandemic virus. But the things that they're putting into place now, social distancing is about the bell curve. And you and I talked about this before the broadcast. Mm-hmm. When you have this everybody getting sick all at once, then you have this huge peak that taxes our ability to respond. But if we can flatten out that curve by not having everybody get sick at once, and a number of people, that illness starts happening a little bit at a time, then our existing infrastructure is very capable of dealing with it, and even at an emergency level. So the things that we're putting into place in the United States are coming from a position of knowledge and preparedness. The social distancing, the elimination of having large events where people get together, giving out, basic sanitation measures. Look, keep your hands clean, don't shake hands, stay away from the hugs, maybe a fist bump or an elbow tap, whatever it is. But I think we're very, very well prepared for this. I think the fear is that when the first wave comes, okay, because we're building up to that first wave, when the first wave comes, that our existing services are going to become overwhelmed. And I think we've got the things in place that are trying to keep that from happening. And to be honest, I mean, when you look at coronavirus and you look who it's affecting, okay, you can have the virus and maybe, you may not get that sick with it. Now myself, I'm a little bit more mature. I've had pneumonia because of exposure to oil fires in the Middle East, and so my lungs are a little bit compromised. But what did I do? I went out and got a pneumonia vaccination. And I get that every 8 to 10 years. That's just part of my personal resiliency. So, taking basic precautions, keeping your hands washed, minimizing the time that you spend out and about. If you, the biggest issue is going to be the economic impact on the United States, because if people aren't going to work, if they're not earning an income, then that's going to have residual effect over time.
I would also imagine that has a lot to do, especially on a personal level, with having emergency reserves.
Yes.
And that's, I think, one of the biggest problems in the U.S. is people are living very paycheck to paycheck. And when something like this happens, and all of a sudden, maybe I'm sure there's a lot of people who can't go to work for several weeks now, whether it's because their business is shut down or their kids are no longer in school and somebody has to, pay attention and take care of them. I would imagine having that kind of cash reserve so you can float a little bit.
Well, the good news is if you're working regularly, you can always apply for unemployment benefits. And sometimes we have a tendency to forget about that, and then a lot of businesses are making it right. They're still paying their employees. They're allowing their employees to work from home and do what they can from home. And then, of course, if you have vacation or sick time built up, this is a case for maybe not using all your PTO when it pops up, and instead of taking that long weekend and spending Monday recovering, maybe banking that PTO against some time like this when you really need those 5 to 7 to 14 days off, that you have it in your business, in your personal account at your business, and you can take that time off and use those funds and that time for that purpose.
Absolutely. Well, and obviously, as an entrepreneur, I talk about this at the higher level too, at the business level. I've had a lot of other entrepreneurs in the area that I'm tied to call me within the last couple of days. And it's funny because their conversation hasn't been anything about, oh, I'm in danger, or I'm not sure about how things are going. They've been asking questions like, how do we help the other people who are hurting business-wise?
Absolutely.
Seattle, there's articles about Seattle being a ghost town right now. And it's because nobody wants to go out. It's an epicenter type of a place. And so
Sure.
There are businesses who are going to be hurting. And so, but their conversation is more about, how can business owners help other business owners, right? Because there are certain industries that are a little bit more insulated than others from something like this.
Well, I'll give you an example of what I'm doing. We've got a number of small businesses near my house. One is a restaurant, right? Family-owned business. I was talking with the owner yesterday. They do a lot of catering. They've had 3 catering events cancel. So I made the decision to eat a couple meals there.
Yeah.
It's clean. It's in a more rural part of town, so there's not a lot of people. So if I can support them that way by patronizing their business, then that's exactly what I'm going to do.
I think that's a great idea, and I think that was a lot of the conversation that we had talked about too. Is, hey, maybe in my budget I only allow for eating out one night a week, but we really want to help support the local business in our area. Otherwise, they're not going to be here 6 weeks from now, right? Or 60 days from now, when all of this kind of, if it does settle down at that point, which of course everybody's hoping that it does. But I think it's been made clear, and I think this is the wake-up call that people are going to have to get, is this is not going to be gone by Monday, right?
No.
This is something that we're going to be dealing with for a minute.
Well, it's just like we deal with flu, but eventually we will have a vaccine for coronavirus, and you'll get vaccinated against it, and it will not be so impactful the next time around. But that doesn't mean some other resistant virus is not going to pop up. The more we have people living in close proximity, the more population increases, the more the opportunity occurs for health-related issues. One of the things that I've always remembered, and I'm sure you do too from my time in the military, field hygiene and field sanitation were huge. huge. We made sure that everything was clean and scrubbed, and people were clean and scrubbed, even in the worst of situations. Dipping that mess kit in boiling water, and scrubbing it out before you go and eat your meal, and then doing it again afterwards, went a long way. I mean, I don't ever remember getting sick on active duty, and we had very, very firm field sanitation requirements.
That's definitely a big deal. And you're right, there were a lot of SOPs and protocols put into place to keep that. And I guess I never really thought about it at the time. But you're right, it was a very stringent thing, that it was just something that this is the protocol, this is what you do.
Yep.
That makes sense. Definitely something that would be worth instilling here. You know what I'm saying? And obviously, I don't think we're obviously not in the field.
No.
But, is it possible, if this were to get out of control, that it does head that way? I mean, what don't we have in the field? We don't have running water. We don't have power. We don't have all these things. Well, we have the luxury of having it here.
We have running water. We have power. You
Right.
have soap and water, which is probably the biggest and easiest thing that you can do to take care of yourself. Just keep yourself clean.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've seen a couple of your keynote speeches. You have a very interesting ideology that I think a lot of people don't think about, and that's that risk isn't always bad. I'd love for you to dive into what you think about risk as a whole and how you approach risk.
Well, risk is very interesting. We all deal with risk at some point. If you own a car, you're dealing with risk. We go out, you pay $20,000 to $50,000 for a vehicle or a motorcycle or whatever you ride, and then we turn around. What's the first thing we do? We buy insurance. We know we're good drivers, but we always know in the back of our mind that there's that opportunity that there may be somebody who's not as good a driver as us that's going to make a mistake and hit us, and they're going to impact our investment. All right, and if they do that, then we need to protect that investment. If you look at that in a much broader sense, and you look at all the things that can impact us, okay, whether, at a corporate level, it's a little bit different than an individual level, but, at a corporate level, natural disasters, which is what we're dealing with now, pandemics, tornadoes, those types of things, accidental hazards like the tipped over rail car or the truck that has an accident and has a large spill, or man-made hazards like crime and terrorism. Everybody is impacted by those things at different levels, and the impact is different based on what the company does, what they produce, what service they provide, things like that. We don't talk about it much, but continuity of government. What happens when you can't field enough police officers or firefighters are getting sick? Those are the things that we want to avoid. The way you avoid that is by identifying what those risks are. And that's where our area of specialty is. We engage in a process called a risk, threat, and vulnerability assessment. And essentially what we're doing is we're looking at what are the verifiable threats, man-made, natural, and technological, that can impact an organization. What is their current level of preparedness to deal with that threat? So that could be physical security, access control, video cameras on the security side. It's plans, policies, and procedures. It's people. It's training of your people and how well they're trained. It's the exercises that occur. And then once we identify that, we also look at the consequence, because consequence is huge. So when you have consequence, you have two things. You really have what's called likelihood and impact, okay? And finances are something that everybody can understand. So if I'm a business that makes $3 million a year, okay, then an incident that costs me $2 million a year is a high consequence incident, okay? If it's less than that, if it's say 25,000, then that might be a low consequence incident. So what that does is that helps us to understand what is a reasonable investment to prevent that consequence from occurring as perpetrated by the risk. So this is what we help companies to do, is once we identify risk, once we identify the impact and likelihood of consequence, once we identify current levels of preparedness, then we recommend mitigations. And we say, okay, this is the mitigation that you need to employ to prevent this or minimize the impact of this event on your organization. And sometimes they retain us to help them to employ that mitigation. Sometimes they'll ask us for recommendations on who can do that, or sometimes they'll just go out on their own. And then a lot of times it's just a policy and procedure, some in-house training that needs to occur that fixes that issue. So we engage in this, and I mean the spectrum of threats, everything from civil disorder to a pandemic event to a tsunami that occurs in another country. When you start looking at global supply chain and you look at the things that are on your desk or in your refrigerator or what you pick up at Walmart or Costco or Sam's Club or any of those places, it's not like there's this huge warehouse somewhere in Tacoma that's stocking all this stuff. What's happening is that stuff is actually being shipped from a location overseas, okay? And sometimes that could be upwards of, 6 months before the actual need happens. So you look at, let's just take holiday supplies at Christmas, It's not like those things just showed up at Walmart in September. They're actually shipped back in April and May from the country of origin where they're produced, put into a warehouse, distributed, break bulk throughout the United States through the supply chain. So if there's a tsunami or a major earthquake or other event in the location where that event occurred, then the ripple effect on getting those goods to market in the United States can be huge. So when we're looking at risk, we're also looking at, especially for global companies, we're looking at global impact and global supply chain and those issues that can affect risk on a much greater scale. We don't talk about it much, but when the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami occurred in Japan, well, that's the home to Canon America, that's the home to Canon, that's the home to Honda, that's the home to Toyota, that's where a lot of computer chips are done, that's where camera parts are created and everything else. The impact on the American economy from the loss of those services was about $42 billion with a B, because you couldn't get hard drives, you couldn't get parts to build computers, you couldn't get repair parts for your cameras. All those things had impact. So there are things that you can do to have a distributed supply network so that if one aspect is impacted, the other aspect is not. So this whole study of global supply chain and resilience for companies is important. And I mean, just think about it. You look at this, you look at this bottle of water, you look at my iPad, and, you say, okay, where did the parts from this come from? It just didn't show up in the Apple store. The parts were obtained somewhere, it was assembled somewhere, it was put into supply distribution chain, and eventually showed up in the Apple store where I bought it or online. So those are all things that impact our quality of life, and they impact a company's ability to stay in business. Because if I can't produce what I produce, whatever that is, then I don't make a profit. And if I don't make a profit, then I don't stay in business, and I go away and somebody else does what I do. So it's a real interesting study when you look at the study of risk as the basis for all of this, which I find just amazing. I'm getting ready to write an article, actually, on risk and resilience as a means of identifying inefficiencies. Because a lot of times what we find is it's not a bad system, it's just an inefficient system. And the ability to create efficiency, of course, saves money. In fact, in some cases, actually raises revenue. So doing a complete side thing now, because we've looked at risk and resiliency mostly from the side of preparedness. Well, I'm getting ready to start looking at risk as a means of identifying inefficiencies in organizations so that those inefficiencies can be improved upon.
Absolutely. It's always an interesting conversation. Of course, we had Paul Akers on the show talking about lean and process improvements and all that kind of stuff. And so it is such an interesting thing, and it isn't just applicable to business. It's so applicable to your life too, to identify efficiencies and make things more efficient.
Yeah.
More smooth. It's such a powerful thing.
Well, there's a great tie-in there. If you look at Paul Aker and you look at Six Sigma, okay, this actually stems from a U.S. industrialist by the name of W. Edwards Deming. W. Edwards Deming really changed American manufacturing. He's a great guide if you want to read about some really unique things. He was one of the people that coined the phrase, you can't manage what you can't measure. And so how do we know what to measure? You have to have the processes, you have to do the risk identification, you have to know what you're doing in order to make efficiencies. He was really, when he came to U.S. manufacturing, specifically the auto industry, with his ideas, they were doing very well at the time. They're like, we don't need you, get out of here, and they kind of blew him off, But post-World War II, they sent W. Edwards Deming to Japan. And we all know what industrial power Japan became. That's where the whole Six Sigma black belt thing comes from, was his work with companies like Mitsubishi, who had made war aircraft, and now they make wonderful cars and electronics and things like that. But Sony, Mitsubishi, and all these other Japanese companies that he used his processes to elevate. And then now we utilize his processes in all aspects of American manufacturing, push-pull delivery. Instead of me having a warehouse, I have just-in-time delivery where the parts I need, when I need them, show up and they're there to be assembled into the larger component. So a lot of things in my industry are really core management philosophies that were developed by W. Edwards Deming and then further acted upon in lean processes.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit about how technology has influenced risk or risk analysis or risk aversion.
Wow.
It's a big umbrella. What I'm thinking about specifically is I heard about a new product that either did hit the market or is going to hit the market when it comes to shootings, active shooters in schools, and I think also in just large areas like malls and stuff like that.
Okay.
It was something about a piece of technology that's installed in the facility that allows them to it basically allows security teams to target where the shots are coming from.
Yes.
That's a very interesting technology to me, and I know there's other things that are in that umbrella as well, as far as being able to identify things so emergency services can come in and have a very good idea of what the situation is.
So let's talk about that. That's actually a very good subject. There are a number of manufacturers that are out there now that are making shot detection devices. There's 3 or 4 primary companies, but essentially what this does is the more of these units that you have in place, the easier it is to triangulate the origin of the shot, okay? So, people that don't know what they're listening for, you listen to folks that talk about active shooters, well, I thought it was firecrackers, or I didn't realize it was a firearm going off, or all I heard was this pop, 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 and most human beings, their concept of what a firearm sounds like is what they see on TV, which is not really realistic. So these devices are capable of identifying a shot, but they are not a standalone device. They can actually be integrated with other physical security devices. So emergency communications and enunciation systems, door locking mechanisms, video cameras, emergency protocols that are pre-planned, pre-programmed. So literally in a fraction of a second, once this unit identifies the sound of a shot, it can turn a camera towards the sound of the shot if the camera exists. It can communicate and send a message to 911. It can lock doors and communicate an immediate message that says, active shooter in effect, lockdown. And that all happens based on the detection of the shot.
Wow.
So it's an amazing technology, and a lot of places are now installing them. I think it's a very reasonable technology and a logical thing, but technology is only as good as the people that are using it, and the integration of technology with other technologies, especially in the realm of emergency communication systems. So, you see these blue poles, in different locations with a camera on top. It says emergency on the side or security. Those are two-way communication systems. You can actually, push the button on one to talk to somebody, talk to a human being, or it can enunciate a message with a speaker and inform you of what to do. So there's a company that I work with very closely called Stenophone. They make some amazing products. There's Eagle Technologies, EAGL, and ShotSpotter, which are two of the companies that are producing these shot detection systems. But when you start looking at physical security, access control, door locking mechanisms, video cameras, visitor management, emergency communication systems, they're all tied together now as a single network. Whereas, 10, even 15 years ago, they were independent standalone systems. Now we can do great things with that integration.
Is that kind of the newest kind of rise in technology lately in that field, is the integration aspect, or is there what's really new on the horizon for that industry, for physical?
Well, integration has been happening for some time. The more advanced we get into integration, it used to be, James, I don't know how old you are, but I go back to the early days of computers. When we had DOS language and we didn't have Windows, right? So when we had DOS language, I would buy a new printer and I'd plug it into my computer, and either the software on my printer was too advanced for my computer, or my computer was too advanced for the software on the printer, and then I would have to sit with tech support on both, trying to get them to decide what we needed to do to patch it. And maybe after 8 hours of tech support, my printer would print out a page. Today we have plug and play. I can take any device, even across platforms. I can plug it into my Xbox. I can plug it into my computer. It recognizes it, goes to work. You look at Ring Video or any of these other video systems that are there. I can take a Ring video camera. It runs on my Alexa. I can look at it on my Apple device. So we're seeing very high levels of integration today in personal use products. In industrial systems, we're a little bit further behind the power curve on what I like to call true integration, the plug and play of the security industry. But we have people out there that are called integrators that assist in conjoining those networks and making them sensible. We also have some technologies out there that are bridging technologies, and these bridging technologies are investing a lot of money in developing engineering, API and web part to allow their bridging technology to communicate with numerous devices and collate that information into a single construct where it's very utilizable.
I'm sure there's a lot of, especially when it comes to risk, we're diving more into the cybersecurity world there as well, because as integration really becomes more popular, more vulnerabilities, I would imagine, come to light.
That's the whole discussion around IoT. And, but the good news is with IoT, if you take the precautions that the manufacturer recommends, if you use unique passwords, if you update your software periodically or every time it tells you need to be updated, then you minimize your ability to be impacted by those types of intrusions. Where most human beings fall victim, in my opinion, in cybersecurity, is really in what I call the physical security of cyber systems. So it's that social engineering telephone call that says, hey, this is technical support and we've detected a virus on your computer and you need to give us access to your computer and we'll go ahead and fix that for you. And then some unwitting person gives them access, and then not only Do they embed key loggers and everything else? They now have all your personal information, banking information, or anything else that you're storing on that computer. The other is through suspicious emails, what I call phishing emails or spoofing emails. A spoofing email is when somebody pretends to be somebody they're not. So you get this email that looks like it's from Bank of America or Microsoft or T-Mobile or whatever company you utilize, and it looks like them, but it's not. And if you click on the hyperlink, then that will take you to another site where they'll ask for personal information. You input it. One of the things that I teach our clients to do, and we teach courses on this, is a technique called hover before you click. So if you go to the address line, the to line, the from line on your email that has that, hover your cursor without clicking on it over the email address, and what it'll do is it'll highlight the whole email address. So if it says from T-Mobile, if it doesn't say tmobile.com, but says, it says, John Woo at hk.com, then you probably know that that's not an email from T-Mobile. So don't click on it, just dispose of it, and don't click on any of the hyperlinks in that message. The other that I see a lot of is via Facebook, and recently there's been exploits, and I told you about the one that I almost got bit by, where somebody goes through Messenger and claims to be a friend that you socialize with regularly, and what they're doing is they're getting into that account because they've located information, personal information, that allows them to get into that account. Then they read the Messenger profile, and then they send out messages to everybody, all their friends in that network. And then they pretend being that friend and get you to give up a piece of personal information or purchase a gift card for them or give them credit card information, and they go and they run with that, and next thing you know, your account is getting hit, for several $1,000s. The way you avoid that is, one, keep your profiles locked down on social media, and change your password frequently. If you do get spoofed, or if somebody sends you a video that says, hey, click on this, I think I saw you in this video, it's not you. Don't click on the video, and then tell your friend that their account has been compromised, and then they can change their password, which is the simplest way to deny accessibility to that third party that's trying to spoof you into believing that they're your friend.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously, like we said earlier, we're going to be dealing with this coronavirus thing for a while. I think we're still at the pretty early stages of it. What do you see? I mean, obviously, we're here in the Puget Sound, where we're kind of one of the epicenters here in the U.S. for this whole thing, especially with what happened up in Kirkland. And, of course, now Governor Inslee has almost practically locked the state down.
Right.
Almost all schools are canceled until end of April. All major events, the Tacoma Dome, all sporting events. I mean, we're really shutting down. What do you think is next?
Well, I think it's, I'm not a medical professional, nor am I a bioscientist, but what I do know is that things that are contagious will spread rapidly. And, if we can engage in social distancing, we can mitigate and minimize the speed with which that happens. Coronavirus has a very narrow window of who it's really impacting. It's impacting those who are already immunocompromised. It is affecting those that are mature with respiratory problems. Those that are already having a number of medical problems. It doesn't seem to be bothering kids too much. And interestingly enough, I read a statistic the other day that smokers seem to have a 10% higher chance of having complications from coronavirus. So I think, what we need to do as individuals is try to keep ourselves healthy, get plenty of fresh air, keep up your exercise regimen, eat regularly, don't become a victim of fear. If you do get sick and you're not a person in those high-risk categories, look, we all get the flu every year. We all, not all of us, but some of us get the flu every year. You get a cold every year. These are things that just go around periodically. The thing is with this, it being such a new strain, is that it's going to impact a lot of people. Now, how sick you get is going to be different from person to person in what I'm reading. So I do anticipate that at some point in time, I will probably get sick from this or the flu or something else, and I'll probably be down for the count for 3 to 5 to 7 days, and then I'll be back to normal again. So, it's don't succumb to fear and don't succumb to the hype, and be confident in your own abilities to take care of yourself and take care of your family and make sure that you have the things that you need. And by all means, if you do feel ill, make sure that you get yourself, contact your medical professionals, find out what to do from your healthcare agency that you work with, and minimize your contact with others so that you're not spreading it.
Yeah, I've heard in Washington, at least, I don't know about the other states, but in the Puget Sound area, I know the military has set up a quarantine center.
Yes.
Which is great. I also heard they're doing drive-through testing, which is pretty interesting. I'm not sure if you've heard about that, but
no, I haven't.
Yeah, so there's a drive-through test. I think it's up in the Seattle area, where you literally drive through. They're capturing information. I think they're probably swabbing would be my guess, and then off to the lab.
I do know that they just found. We were reading this morning that a test that was used for Ebola can also be used for testing coronavirus. So they're going to start releasing that. And I also know they're accelerating testing on antivirals so that, eventually they'll have an injection or some oral thing that you can take to build up an immunity to coronavirus so that you're not impacted.
Well, I know that's been a big conversation. Everybody's kind of getting lost in the numbers. Oh, we had 500 positive cases today, but I think what people are not realizing is the testing has been slow to catch on.
Sure.
The ability to test has been slow.
Right.
And so I think there's been a lot of, unreported, incubated cases that have been there, even though we only reported 22 new cases, a week ago, the numbers were still pretty small.
Well, the important thing is with coronavirus, and what makes it so viral, for lack of a better word, is the fact that you can be contagious for 2 weeks before you show symptoms. So you don't know that you have it, and you could be passing contagion on to others that you've come in contact with.
Yeah. Feel bad for those people on cruise ships right now.
Wow.
They're going to be hurt. And I actually have a buddy that's on one right now. I've been sending him text messages like, hope you brought your laptop with you so you can work from the ship, because you're probably not coming off.
Nancy and I took our cruise back in January before all this happened. I'm really glad we did it then.
No kidding. No kidding. Well, thank you for coming in today. I really appreciate your time and your expertise in this area. Really hope you stay safe out there, and for your sake, I hope you stay clean and don't pick this thing up. Yeah.
Nope.
Wash your hands.
Wash your hands, man.
Wash your hands.
Wash your hands. Keep your hands away from your face. You know.
That's right.
And fist bump and elbow bump a lot.
I definitely have like the people who were doing the foot taps. It's pretty creative. Pretty creative. I like it. Well, stay safe out there, and we'll see you on the next run.
All right, James. Thank you for the opportunity. It's been great today.
Absolutely. Thanks.
You bet.